Hello, guys. How are you doing? Welcome to our session for today's lesson on analyzing drama. Let's start with our objectives. First, review the elements of drama, discuss the features in analyzing a drama, and explain the general process of analyzing a drama. So, two questions. How is drama different from prose or poetry? What makes drama unique? Drama has one characteristic that is peculiar to itself. It is written primarily to be performed, not read. Drama, guys, is a mode of fictional representation through dialogue and performance. It is one of the literary genres which is an imitation of some action. It also tends to differ from other literary works by its reliance upon dialogue and characters. When one deals with dramatic texts, one has to bear in mind that drama differs considerably from poetry or narrative in that it is usually written for the purpose of being performed on stage. Although plays exist which were mainly written for a reading audience, dramatic texts are generally meant to be transformed into another mode of presentation or medium, and that is theater. For this reason, guys, dramatic texts even look different compared to poetic or narrative texts. One distinguishes between the primary text, that is the main body of the play spoken by the characters, and secondary text, that is all the text surrounding or accompanying the main text, like the title, dramatis personae, scene descriptions, stage directions for acting and speaking, etc. Depending on whether one reads a play or watches it on stage, one has different kinds of access to dramatic text. As a reader, one receives first-hand written information on what the characters look like, how they act and react in certain situations, how they speak, what sort of setting forms the background, to a scene, etc. However, one also has to make a cognitive effort to imagine all these features and interpret them for oneself. Stage performances, on the other hand, are more or less ready made instantations of all of these details. In other words, guys, at the theater, one is presented with a version of the play which has already been interpreted by the director, actors, costume designers, makeup artists, and all the other members of the theater staff who bring the play to life. The difference then lies in divergent forms of perception. While we can actually see and hear actors play certain characters on stage, we first decipher a text about them when reading a play script and then at best see them in our mind's eye and hear their imaginary voices. Now, put another way, stage performances offer a multisensory access to plays and they can make use of multimedia elements such as music, sound effects, lighting, stage props, etc. While reading is limited to the visual perception and thus draws upon one primary medium, the play as the text. Now, this needs to be kept in mind in discussions of dramatic text, and because these are to be these are the fundamentals now as we go along to the analysis of drama later on. But before that one, guys, let's have a review now on the elements of drama first. I know that you have already encountered these terms, key terms, concepts, these elements already before. But yeah, it's important that before we go into the analysis stage, we first go through the basics now, which are the elements of drama. Okay, so the elements of drama by which dramatic works can be analyzed and evaluated can be categorized into three major areas. You have literary elements, technical elements, and performance elements. Okay, let's examine these elements on the next few slides. First, the elements of drama, okay, the literary elements by Aristotle. So you have plot, the theme, the characters, dialogue, music or rhythm, and also spectacle. Spectacle. In theater, guys, as defined by Aristotle, spectacle includes all the visual effects or aspects of production that include costumes, makeup, scenery, and even special effects. So these are the elements of drama, literary elements. For plot, now plot refers to the action, the basic storyline of the play. So you have different types of plot, diba, as discussed in the previous lessons that we have. Okay, not necessarily um, the plot intended solely for drama, but it may also be a kind of plot that um, prose writers use. Okay, so you have initial incident, preliminary event, rising action, climax, falling action, denouement. So these are the six stages in a plot structure, and that there are also ways, on how to make a twist in our in making a plot. I think if you can still recall, some of those include what like there's a flashback and that foreshadowing, that's putting a twist on the plot. You have the theme. So the theme, guys, refers to the meaning of the play. Now, it is the main idea or lesson to be learned from the play. In some cases, the theme of a play is obvious, while other times it is quite subtle. So some general themes include conflict. There are various types of conflict. You have man versus supernatural power, and now we have man versus technology, man versus society. So those types of conflict. And there are many themes that you could explore with play. Then in a play, then characters, these are the people or sometimes animals. They can be animals or ideas portrayed by the actors in the play. It is the characters who move the action or plot. Characterization is the way an author presents a character. So you have protagonist, the bida, the antagonist is usually the villain, flat character, okay, the character that uh, remains the same all throughout the play, the round character, which is a character who keeps on evolving. There is significant change in his or her characterization in the play. The static, dynamic, foil, stack character, stereotype, or archetype. So these types of characters actually, guys, are have been previously discussed already, as elements also of a story or elements all of a narrative prose. So these aren't new to you. Next is dialogue. This refers to the words written by the playwright and spoken by the characters in the play. The dialogue helps move the action of the play along. So there are various forms of dialogue, an exchange between two or more characters. It could be a soliloquy and what is referred to as aside or aside. Soliloquy, this is when a character that is typically alone on stage and delivers a long speech, which is called soliloquy. Emotions and innermost thoughts of the character are revealed in solo. Okay. Aside, this is spoken by a character to another character or to the audience, but is not heard by the other characters on the stage. Asides reveal what the character is thinking or feeling. Then another element is music or rhythm. So while music is often featured drama, This in this case, Aristotle was referring to the rhythm of the actors' voices as they speak. Okay, so it isn't necessarily the background music. Okay, it could be also it adds up to the elements no of the play. Oftentimes, some playwright use some directors use music to create create a musicality in the play. Okay, we have lastly spectacle. So this refers to the visual elements of a play, the sets, costumes, special effects, etc. So a spectacle is everything that the audience sees as they watch the play. So these are the elements or literary elements of a drama. Now, um elements of drama in the modern theater. I think um, these are there are overlapping elements. One that you can pinpoint, which is different from the other elements, is convention and audience. So convention, these conventions, these are the techniques and methods used by the playwright. So the one writing a play is actually called playwright. The one who is working on the play production is the director, the play producers. Now they are two different people. Although um, nowadays they can actually do both, but uh, oftentimes talaga they are separate people, one who writes the play and one who directs the play. Then you have the genre. Genre refers to the type of a play. Some examples of different genres include comedy, tragedy, mystery, historical play, or tragicomedy, and many more. Then audience is the group of people who watch the play. Of course, the spectators, the sets of audiences. Many playwrights and actors consider the audience to be the most important element of drama, as all of the effort put into writing and producing a play is for the enjoyment of the audience. So it is I don't know, it is imperative that and oftentimes nga naman no, the success of the play largely depend how much the audience no how the audience sets of audiences respond to the play, whether they like it or dislike it, what are the lessons. So it depends din naman, but yun nga no, many playwrights writers no consider audience to be the most important element because most efforts are efforts in from the starting from the writing to producing the play or to actually staging it to performance is for the audience no spectators to enjoy no to find pleasure in that kind of activity. All right. Now, these are the sets of elements naman on the technical aspects. These are the technical elements of a drama. So you have scenery, costumes, properties, lights, sound, and makeup. So scenery, guys, this refers to the theoretical equipment such as the curtains, flats, backdrops, or platforms that are used in a dramatic production to communicate environment. So the set, the costumes, these include the clothing and accessories that are worn by actors to portray character and period. Then properties are any article except for costume or scenery used as part of the dramatic production. Any movable objects that appear on stage during a performance, from a telephone to a train, are considered to be properties. Lights, of course, light elements mean that every placement, intensity, and color of lights have to be set as needed to help communicate environment, mood, or feeling. So we know naman how much lights um, play a significant role in creating a mood. No, when it's like when it's a happy set, no, a happy presentation or performance. So the light could do more. The lighting could actually enhance the the kind of feeling that you get, when if in that particular scenario, when it is sad, lighting could also do some work on that aspect. Then sound, the effects of an audience hears during performance to communicate character, context, or environment. And makeup, of course, includes costumes, wigs, and body paint used to transform an actor to character. So makeup helps the helps the character to characterize talaga, no, to actually act like how the character in the script should look like, so that there is a transformation that happens. So good makeup artists are very helpful in transforming, the actors to really get and to really get into the character and the characterization of the play. Another sets of elements are performance elements. So this includes acting, character motivation, character analysis, and empathy. So acting, this is on the use of face, body, and voice to portray character. Character motivation, this is the reason or reasons for a character's behavior, an intensive incentive or inducement for further action for a character in drama. Then character analysis and responding to dramatic art, the process of examining how the elements of drama, literary, technical, and performance are used. And then empathy, the capacity to relate to the feelings of another. So there are three sets of elements: you have literary elements, technical elements, and performance elements of a drama. Now, in this section, we are going to discuss, the main features, no, at one can look at when analyzing drama. So there are eight of them. First, information flow, space, characters, four types of stage, fifth structure, six time, seven types of utterance, and eight dramatic subgenres. Now in this section, guys, and in the next few slides, I want you to focus on the the discussion, okay? Because many of the things that I am going to say are not on the slides. So what I only include in the slides are the key points or key terms or concepts, that are in each of the feature. Okay? So these are the features that you have to keep in mind in discussing dramatic texts. Okay? So let's start with before we go into the first feature, I want you to have a background on some of the plays that I am going to use as examples, no, when discussing these different features. So one way or another, I'm gonna talk about these plays. So I want you to get familiarized with these, at least three. Okay, these are the most common plays that I am going to use as an example, because when discussing a feature, I want you to visualize. No, I want you to have an idea of what this play I am referring to. So to give you a few background, first you have here a play by Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot. So it is the most well-known play from the theater of the absurd movement. It was written by Samuel Beckett and performed for the first time in Paris in January 5th, 1953. At its premiere, the play shocked its audiences as it presented a new type of theater which used very unconventional methods. In fact, it is said to have nearly caused riots across Western Europe. Godot's debut in the US took place at San Quentin Peninsula in 1957. So, this anecdote is an excellent preface to reading or seeing Waiting for Godot, because it prepares the audience to abandon any preconceptions they may have about theater in order to better understand the piece. Then another piece, guys, is from William Shakespeare's The Tempest. I am sure you have heard of this already. So that the Tempest is a play about magic, betrayal, love, and forgiveness. It is set on an island somewhere near Italy where Prospero, the one-time Duke of Milan, and his beautiful daughter Miranda lived with a sprite called Ariel and a strange wildman called Caliban. Prospero is a powerful magician who creates a storm or tempest that sets the scene for the play. In the events that we follow, we see a plot to murder the king of Naples. So, yeah, for you to get know what I'm talking about, maybe you can pause first in this slide and get a hold with the play, so you may have an idea later on. So also with Waiting for Godot. Another one is Look Back in Anger by John Osborne. So it is a realist play written by John Osborne. It focuses on the life and marital struggles of an intelligent and educated but disaffected young man of working class origin named Jimmy Porter and his equally competent yet impassive upper middle class wife Allison. So again, I wanted to pause for a while and maybe do a quick research on what what type of play is this, or maybe the script of this play, so you guys may have an idea or ideas what I'm talking about. So also with the other two plays that I mentioned in the previous slides. Okay, now let's go to the first feature of that we need to look at when analyzing drama. The first one is information flow. Okay, since in drama there is usually no narrator who tells us what is going on in the story, okay, the audience has to gain information directly from what can be seen and heard on stage. As far as communication model for literary text is concerned, it can be adapted for communication in drama as follows. Okay, so like this, if you can recall, no, same with verbal communication, we also use a model, diba, that illustrates how communication process occurs when people or sets of people communicating. How does communication process work or operate? So we could actually think of the same when doing an analysis, no, particularly on how information flow in a drama. Okay. So in comparison with narrative text, the plane of narrator or narratee is left out except for plays which deliberately employ narrative elements. So information can be conveyed both linguistically in the character speech. Now, for example, or non-linguistically as in stage props, costumes, and stage set, etc. So as you may notice in the diagram, no, the source of information is the real author, no? Then the play author of the text, and then story world, the character to character, reader of secondary text, and then the real spectator. Okay? The code, the message is the text itself. Okay. So you have the real author and the real spectator on both ends. Okay, just like a sender and a receiver, and then the one that the elements that come in between them are the message, in this case the code, and then in instead of channel, instead of medium, it's characters over characters, or characters over characters. Okay, and the story world. All right. Okay, next is next transmission of Before that, amount and detail of information. Okay. The question concerning the amount or detail of information given in a play is particularly important at the beginning of plays where the audience expects to learn something about the problem or conflict of the story. Now, the main characters and also the time and place of the scene. So it's important now that you get to know first what you will expect later on. In other words, guys, the audience is informed about the who, the what, the where, when, and why of the story at the beginning of the plays. Now, this is actually called exposition. So, where the audience get a glimpse of the background of the play, right? Next is transmission, okay, of information. Although in drama, information is usually conveyed directly to the audience. There are instances where a mediator comparable to the narrator of a narrative text appears on stage. A theoretical movement where this technique was newly adopted and widely used was the so-called epic theater, which goes back to the German playwright Bertolt Brecht and developed as a reaction against the realistic theoretical tradition. No, at the center of this, at the center of this German playwright, no, is the idea of alienating the audience from the action presented on stage in order to impede people's emotional involvement in and identification with the characters and conflicts of the story. This is actually called this that alienation effect or the estrangement effect. Yes. So instead, spectators or the audience are expected to gain a critical distance and thus to be able to judge rationally what is presented to them. Okay, some of the narrative elements in this type of theater are songs, banners, and most importantly, a narrator who comments on the action. One must not forget that some of these elements existed before. Thus, ancient Greek drama traditionally made use of chorus, so that is a group of people situated on stage who throughout the play commented on events and their characters' action. Okay, next is perspective. Right. So, introductory information and narrative like commentary need not necessarily be provided by a figure outside the actual play. In one of the Shakespeare's play, no, Richard III, for example, the main protagonist frequently comments on the events and reveals his plans in speeches spoken away from the other character, and that is actually so-called asides. Remember asides? Yung parang nag-story yung character as if the character is talking to another character, but the other character he or she is talking to is not actually present. Diba? Aside. Okay. At the very beginning of this history play, Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, informs the audience about the current political situation and what he has done to change it. So this is the sample, the excerpt, no, of this play. Okay? So, kayo na lang magbasa. Right. So, in this example of the play, excerpt, Richard tells the audience about his dissatisfaction with the current sovereign, and he takes the audience into confidence as far as his plot against his brother Clarence is concerned. So throughout the play, guys, Richard always comments on what happened or what his next plan is, which also means that most of the play is presented from Richard's perspective. This is another important aspect to bear in mind when discussing the mediation of information. Okay? Whose perspective is adopted? So one question we might ask in this case is that whose perspective is adopted? Are there characters in the play whose views are expressed more clearly and more frequently than the others? And finally, what function? Okay, what function does this have? These questions are reminiscent of our discussion on focalization, focal, no, in narrative text. So in this particular excerpt, guys, in Richard 3, for example, the undeniably vicious character of Richard is slightly modified by the fact that we get to know this figure so well. We learn that Richard is also tormented by his ugliness, and we may thus be inclined to take that as an excuse for his viciousness. At the same time, we directly also become partners in crime, since we always know what will happen next, because it appears that in the text, no, Richard reveals his plan. Kasi, di ba, aside yung way of characterization niya. Okay? Thus, whether we want it or not, we are taking sides with Richard to some extent because we are involved in his planning indirectly. And the fact that he is such a brilliant orator might even give us a gloating pleasure in his cunning deeds and plots. Okay. So dramatic irony. Okay. So the way information is conveyed, like that, to the audience, and also how much information is given can have a number of effects on the viewers, and they are thus important questions to us in drama analysis. The discrepancy between the audience and characters' knowledge of certain information can, for example, lead to dramatic irony. No, thus, duplicities or puns, no, the device, no, to make uh you know like make fun, no, at witty, ano yan, yung make fun of language ba, okay, pun. It's not fun, but it's a way of cleverly, playing around with words, na pun. It's a literary device, actually. So narrators in narrative text often use irony in their comments on characters, for example. And they can do that because they, like the audience of a play, are outside the character world and thus possess knowledge which characters may not have. So next, next feature is structure. All right. Okay. So structure. Some key terms and concepts include our story and plot, three unities, and Freitag's pyramid later on. So as with the study of narrative text, one can distinguish between story and plot in drama, right? You know what is story and what is plot, and how they are different, or different and similar in some ways. A story addresses an assumed chronological sequence of events, while plot refers to the way events are casually and logically connected. Remember yung example na um, the queen, the queen died, the king died as well. It's a story. I can't recall exactly what that line is. And then for a plot, say, yeah, the queen died, tapos later after the king died as well. That is, you tell in chronological order the sequence of events, no? But in a plot, you say the queen died, and because of grief, the king died as well. So not only that it tells the chronologically the sequence of events, but also tells us how the events happen. So there is a casual and logical connection, right? So that's plot. Furthermore, plots can have various plot lines, that is, different elaborations of parts of the story which are combined to form the entire plot. For example, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is about the feud between two families, diba? The famous love story. Okay, the love between the two families, children and their tragic death, right? This is roughly the story of the play, which is related in the prologue. The plot, by contrast, encompasses the casually linked sequence of scenes presented on stage to tell the story. Thus, we are presented with a fighting scene between members of the two families whereby the underlying conflict is shown. This is followed later on by Romeo's expression of his love sickness and idea to distract his friend by taking him into a party in the house of the Capulets. Subsequently, the audience is introduced to the Capulets, more specifically to Juliet and her mother, who wants to marry her daughter off to some nobleman, etc. All these scenes, although they seem to be unrelated at first glance, okay, can be identified in retrospect as the foundation for the emerging conflict later on. Now, the story is developed in a minutely choreographed plot where the individual scenes combined are logically built up towards the crisis. Thus, plot refers to the actual logical arrangement of events and actions used to explain why something happened, while story simply designates the gist of what happened in a chronological order. So a story simply tells us no what happened but does not explain, no, that does not provide us the arrangement of events and why these events happen. No. What what leads this event to happen. So that's plot. One might consider the distinction between story and plot futile at times because, for most people's intuition, a chronologically ordered presentation of events also implies a causal link among the presented events. So, I would like you to know that chronology would thus coincide with logical, no, linearity. Whichever way one wants to look at it, plots can always be either linear or non-linear. Non-linear plots, guys, are most likely to confuse the audience and they appear more frequently in modern and contemporary drama. Kasi sa non-linear, hindi siya parang straight lang, hindi siya yung parang, okay, from bata to lumaki, adolescence to matanda. Ano, linear kasi dati eh, but contemporary and modern playwrights are now using different plot twists so it become non-linear already. There is what we call episodic plot, cumulative plot. So maraming mga insertions no na hindi talaga yun siyang tipong linear. Okay? Next is the three unities. What are these? Older plays traditionally aim at conveying a sense of cohesiveness and unity. And one of the classical poetic laws to achieve this goal was the idea of the three unities: the unity of the plot, the unity of place, and the unity of time. Although only the unity of plot is explicitly expressed or addressed in Aristotle's Poetics, the other two unities are also often attributed to him, while in reality, these concepts were postulated a lot later by the Italian scholar Castelvetro in his commentary on Aristotle, which dated in 1500s. No, the unities mean that a play should have only one single plot line, no, which ought to take place in a single locale and within one day, one revolution of the sun, for example. The idea behind this, guys, is to make a plot more plausible, more true to life, and thus to follow Aristotelian's concept of mimesis. That is, the attempt to imitate or reflect life as authentically as possible. If the audience watches a play whose plot hardly has a longer time span than the actual viewing of the play, and if the focus is one problem, only that is presented within one place, then it is presumably easier for the viewers to succumb to the illusion of the play as if it is real. So the very goal is that the play accounts a real life scenario. Kaya um for Aristotle, it has a plot should only have a single local, no, one day within the day, para talaga reality based, or at least something that could occur like this in real life. Many authors, however, guys, disagree, no, with the unities, or adhered to only some of them. Shakespeare's, for example, The Tempest, ostensibly follows the rule of the unity of time, but not the two others. No? Um, and it adheres to some extent to the unity of place, since everything takes place on Prosperous Island. Yet even there, the characters are dispersed all over the island to different places, so that no real unity is achieved. As far as the unity of plot is concerned, however, it becomes clear that there are a number of minor plots which combine to form the story of what happened to the king of Naples and his men after they were shipwrecked on the island. So that's it. Okay. Next is this one. I know you guys are familiar with this. No, Freitag's Pyramid. Okay. So another model frequently used to describe the overall structure of play is the so-called Freitag's Pyramid, or Gustav's Freitag Pyramid. Okay. So in the pyramid, you have how many acts? Five. So Act 1 contains all introductory information and thus serves as exposition. Now, the main characters are introduced, and by presenting a conflict, the play prepares the audience for the action in subsequent acts. Next, the second act actually propels the plot by introducing further circumstances. So or problems related to the main issue. The main conflict starts to develop, and characters are presented in greater detail. So this is when things get complicated na. Then in Act 3, which is the peripety, okay? The plot reaches its climax. A crisis occurs where the deed is committed that will lead to the catastrophe, and this brings about a turn, no, or what is called peripety in the plot. Okay, the fourth act creates new tension. It's the falling action, no, in that it delays the final catastrophe by further events. No, this is where patapos na siya pero meron pang turn of events that leads to the fifth act. So, the fifth act finally offers a solution to the conflict presented in the play. While tragedies end in catastrophe, usually the death of the protagonist, comedies are simply resolved. No? Traditionally, makita natin yung mga wedding, nag-end ang story with a wedding. For example, love story siya. So, ang ending is a wedding of these two lovers, no? Or, um, after several drama of hilak-hilak, they eventually lead into resolution. Of families, for example, there is a feud between two families. Tas, yan nga, no, they come into resolution and they become festive at the end. So that's it. Okay, so there are five acts in Gustav Freitag's pyramid. Next, under still in the second feature, open and closed drama. So while traditional plays usually, no, albeit not exclusively, adhere to the five act structure, those that I mentioned in the previous slide, modern plays have deliberately moved away from this rigid format, partly because it is considered too artificial and restrictive, and partly because many contemporary playwrights generally do not believe in structure and order anymore. That is pretty much evident in, during post-structuralism period. Another way to look at this is that traditional plays typically employ a closed structure, while most contemporary plays are open. The terms open and closed, guys, closed drama, guys, go back to the German literary critic, no, whose name is Volker Klotz or Klotz. who distinguish between plays where the individual acts are tightly connected and logically built on one another, finally leading to a clear resolution of the plot, and that is under closed form, and plays where scenes only loosely hang together and are even exchangeable at times, and where the ending does not really bring about any conclusive solution or result. Compare also open endings and closed endings in narrative text. So, the other hand naman, open plays typically also neglect the concept of unities and are thus rather free as far as their overall arrangement is concerned. So, ang closed, guys, is parang siyang linear, no? If you come to think about it, it's more linear. Okay, it's more traditional, conventional, that you really have to adhere to specific forms, which which may not be which may not be followed by some contemporary playwrights nowadays. Now, to some extent, they may neglect some concepts of unities, but rather they would want to be free as much as possible, no, particularly on the arrangement, overall arrangement of the plot. Okay, so the fact that some authors adhere to certain dramatic conventions, that is follow certain known practices and traditions, and others do not, it is obviously an interesting factor to consider in drama analysis, since this may give us, no, particularly you guys, a clue to certain ideological or philosophical concepts or beliefs expressed in play. Okay, the next feature is space. So space, some key terms and concepts here are word scenery, setting, and characterization, and symbolic space. Space is an important element in drama since the stage itself also represents a space where action is presented. One must, of course, not forget that types of stage have changed in the history of the theater, and that this is also influenced by the ways plays were performed. Significantly, of course, if you are into watching or reading documentaries. No? There is one documentary that I have recently watched on how much drama has had changed through time. The analysis of places and settings in place can help us get a better feel for characters and their behavior, but not only their behavior and characters, but also for the overall atmosphere. Place can differ significantly with regard to how space is presented and how much information about space is offered. Okay? The stage set quite literally sets the scene now for a play, in that it already conveys a certain tone. Example, one of desolation, poverty, or mystery and secrecy. The fact that the description of the stage sets in the secondary text is sometimes very detailed and sometimes hardly worth mentioning is another crucial starting point for further analysis, since that can tell us something about more general functions of settings. Actual productions frequently invent their own set, not independent of the information provided in the text. Thus, a very detailed set with lots of stage props may simply be used to show off theoretical equipment. Okay? All right. Okay, so since drama is multimedia, the visual aspect inevitably plays an important role. So that is word scenery. Now, the layout, overall appearance of the set is usually described in stage directions or descriptions at the beginning of the acts or sets. Scenes, thus, all the necessary stage props that includes properties used on stage, such as furniture, no, accessories, etc., and possibly stage painting, can be presented verbally in secondary text, which is then translated into an actual visualization on stage. So, guys, one must not forget that directors are, of course, free to interpret secondary text in different ways and thus to create innovative renditions of plays. That is why there are cases where the playwright and the director might actually have conflict on. Kasi si director may iba siyang interpretation while si playwright gusto niya ganito based on what he or she has written on the script. But then in some cases si director meron mga instant changes, no. So if if they have to really work on a good play, they really have to agree with one another, no? To what extent does the playwright consider revisions, no? And then there must also an agreement to what extent a director can only make changes of. Okay, so that's what happens. Okay, so the set, or more precisely what is supposed to represent, can also be conveyed in the character's speech. All right. Next is setting and characterization. So we're still under space. Okay. The setting can be used as a means of indirect characterization. Thus, the anonymity and unloving atmosphere among, for example, the characters in Edward Bond's play Saved is anticipated by and mirrored in the bareness of the stage set, where only the most necessary pieces of furniture are presented, but nothing that would give Pam's parents' flat a more personal touch. So, the very setting of that particular play tells us so much about the character of Ed, the characters in the play. No? There were very limited furnitures used, and that enough. This very scenario setting tells us so much um about the characters. Okay? Next, guys, is symbolic space. Another important factor to consider in this context is the interrelatedness of setting and plot. Obviously, naman din, the plot of a play is never presented in a vacuum, but always against the background of a specific scenery, and often the setting corresponds with what is going on in the story world, right? So thus, for example, the storm at the beginning of Shakespeare's The Tempest not only starts off the play and functions as an effective background to the action, but it also reflects the disorder, no, in which the characters find themselves at the beginning. Antonio lawfully holds the position of his brother, while Prospero and his brother Prospero, then Sebastian is willing to get rid of his brother Alonso, King Alonso, in order to take his place. And the savaged and deformed slave Caliban broods on revenge against his self-appointed master Prospero. So, there's one can say that rather than only functioning as a background, or creating a certain atmosphere, these spaces become symbolic spaces, as they actually point towards other levels of meaning or other layers of meaning in the text. They are not there to be just props, no, to be just there, no. They are there to serve each purpose, no, each purpose. They are symbolic spaces. The setting can thus support the expression of the worldview current at certain time, or general philosophical, ethical, or even moral questions. So so Nowadays, theaters are equipped with all sorts of sets, props, and technical machinery, which allow for a wide range of audiovisual effects, right? But especially with the kind of equipment that they use nowadays, with the advanced world, the kind of world that we have, very advanced. When analyzing plays, guys, it is worthwhile asking to what extent the plays actually make use of these devices, and for what purpose. One important question one can ask, for example, is whether space is presented in detail or only in general terms. Okay, next is time. Right. Time in drama can be considered from a variety of angles. One can, for example, look at time as part of the play, like how are references to time made in the character's speech, the setting, the stage directions. What is the overall time span of the story? For what's the duration ba? On the other hand, time is also a crucial factor in the performance of a play. Like, how long does the performance actually take? Needless to say, guys, that the audience perception of time can also vary. Another question one can ask in this context is, which general concepts of time are expressed in and by a play? So, yun. Okay, let's start with succession and simultaneity. One of the first distinctions one can make is the one between succession and simultaneity. Events and actions can take place in one of two ways. No, events and actions can take place on after the other. That's succession. Okay? Or events can happen all at the same time. That is simultaneous. No, simultaneity. When these events are performed on stage, their presentation in scenes will inevitably be successive, while they may well be simultaneous according to the internal time frame of the play. So, okay. So let's again go back to the example, Shakespeare's The Tempest. Given the fact that the plot is supposed to last only 3 hours, one must presume that the various subplots presenting the different groups of people dispersed over the island must take place roughly at the same time. Example, Caliban's encounter with Trincolo and Stefano in Act Second, which under Scene 2, and which is continued in the third act, okay, is likely to take place at the same time as Miranda's and Ferdinand's conversation in 3 and 1. A sense of simultaneity, guys, is created here because different plot lines alternate in strings of immediately successive scenes. On the other hand, if no other indication of divergent time frames is given in the text, viewers normally automatically assume that the events and actions presented in subsequent scenes are also successive in their temporal order. Okay. Next naman is presentation of temporal frames. There are a number of possibilities to create a temporal frame in drama. Allusions to time can be made in the characters' conversations. The exact time of a scene can be provided in the stage directions or certain stage props like clocks and calendars, or auditory devices such as church bells ringing in the background can give the audience a clue about what time is it. Although hindi siya kailangan sabihin, no? Like if a church bell rings, that might be indicative na 12:00. That might be indicative that's 6, 12, or 3. So um these are ways, no, to present, to create a temporal frame when it comes to time. Okay, or it could also be clock like props, no? That might be in the calendars. Okay. So let's take for example here the play of Shakespeare, Hamlet. When the guards see the ghost of Hamlet's father, the time is given in the guard's account of the same apparition during the previous night. So let's see. Last night of all, when yawned same star that sword from the pole had made his course, the alumin, I don't know exactly how this one is pronounced. Um that part of heaven where now it burns, Marcellus and myself, the building beating one. So while this instance, the exact time is expressed verbally by one of the characters, the crowing of a clock off stage indicates that the approaching daylight later in that scene and causes the apparition to disappear. So that's one way. Next, guys, is story time and discourse time. Okay. So another important distinction, one that one needs to be made when analyzing time in drama is about between fictive story time or played time and real playing time. Okay. So while the played time or the time of the story, um, the playing time of a piece of drama, of course, always depends on the speed at which actors perform individual scenes and can thus vary significantly from one performance to another. Okay? A gaps in the played time of a piece of drama is called ellipsis. So that is one leaves out bits of the story and thus speeds up the plot. Now, considering that scenes usually present actions directly, one can assume that played time and playing time usually coincide in drama. Or in other words, if characters are presented talking to one another for say 20 minutes. Now, then it will normally take about 20 minutes for actors to perform this conversation. Discrepancies between the duration of played time and present and playing time mostly concur with scenic breaks because it is difficult to present them convincingly in the middle of an interaction. However, an example of speed up or summary that is a situation where the actual playing time is shorter than the time span presented in the play interaction can be found, for instance, in some plays like plays of Thomas Middleton's and William Rowley's The Changeling. So um uh, that's one way. Okay, it's what we call speed up or summary. Okay, next is order. Okay, order na ba? Yes, order. So another aspect to look at when analyzing time in drama is the concept of order. Okay, how are events ordered temporally? Okay, does the temporal sequence of scenes correspond with the temporal order of events and actions in the presented story? Like narrative, drama can make use of flashbacks and flash forward. No? In flashbacks, events from the past are mingled with presentation of the current events, while in flash forwards, future events are anticipated. So there is the audience are given a glimpse of what will happen in the future. While flashbacks are not as common since they potentially threaten the build up of the audience suspense, if we already know what is going to happen, we can at best wonder how this ending is brought about. Flashbacks naman are frequently used in order to illustrate a character's memories or to explain the outcome of certain actions. Okay, next. There are three terms which are often used in the context of discussions of chronology and order. And of chronology and order are the three basic types of beginnings. Okay, let's discuss this one. Okay, these terms, guys, refer to the point of time of a story at which a play sets in, and they are thus closely related to the amount of information viewers are offered at the beginning of a play. The first one is ab ovo. The play starts at the beginning of the story and provides all the necessary background information concerning the characters, their circumstances, conflicts, etc. So basically, providing the audience the background information about the play. That's ab ovo. Next is in medias res. The story starts somewhere in the middle and leaves the viewer puzzled at first. So this is this isn't the conventional way of starting a play. No, like a story din ba? Di ba? Meron din cases na ganyan. That at the beginning you seem puzzled because the story starts somewhere na parang climax siya, somewhere that it should be the it should supposed to happen when the story gets unfolded, but it is still the beginning of the play. So that's in medias res. Then in ultima res, the story begins with its actual outcome or ending and then relates events in reverse order. Now, thus drawing the audience attention to how rather than the what of the story. So plays which use this method are called analytic plays. Okay. So, while in narrative analysis, guys, the terms ab ovo and in medias res are also used to distinguish between beginnings, where the reader is introduced to the plot by means of preliminary information, mostly conveyed by the narrator, and the beginnings where the reader is simply thrust into the action of the narrative. Plays, by definition, always already present now the viewer with some action unless now there is a narrative like mediator, like chorus or commentator, etc. Since in that sense, plays are usually always in medias res because they present viewers directly with an interaction among characters, it might be more appropriate to use the more narrow definition given above for drama, which is I think limited to timing of beginnings, no, and that does not focus so much on the mode of presentation. Next is frequency. Another facet of time worth analyzing, guys, is the concept of frequency. That is how often an event is presented. Now, although the categories proposed by Jeanette for narrative text are not directly applicable to drama, one can nevertheless identify similar structures. According to Jeanette, there are three possible types of reference to an event. Okay, these are these three: singulative, repetitive, and iterative. So for singulative, an event takes place once and is referred to once, singular. Repetitive, this event takes place once but is being referred to or presented repeatedly, repetition or repetitive. And iterative, an event takes place several times but is referred to in the text only once. Okay? All right. Characters. Okay, next. Characters. Another feature is characters. Okay. Since drama presents us directly with scenes which are based on people's actions and interactions, characters play a dominant role in this genre and therefore deserve close attention. The characters in plays can generally be divided into major characters and minor characters, depending on how important they are for the plot. A good indicator, guys, as to whether a character is major or minor is, of course, no, the amount of time and speech as well as the presence on stage the character is allocated. Exposure ba? Okay? As a rule of thumb, major characters usually have a lot to say and appear frequently throughout the play, while minor characters have less presence or appearance on stage, only marginally. Now, thus, for example, Hamlet is clearly the main character or the protagonist in Shakespeare's famous tragedy, as we can infer from the fact that he appears in most scenes and is allocated a number of speeches. Diba? Next is character complexity. Major characters are frequently, albeit not exclusively, no, multidimensional and dynamic, no, or round characters, ba, no, there are changes. Like at the beginning, this character shows this kind of character, and then as the story unfolds, as the play unfolds, there are changes of the characters. Um, Personality. So that's round. Now, while minor characters often remain monodimensional and static or sometimes flat, no, flat character. Multidimensional characters display several, even conflicting, no, character traits and are thus reasonably complex. They also tend to develop throughout the plot. Hence, they are dynamic, right? Though this is not necessarily the case for some, but oftentimes, okay? Monodimensional characters, on the other hand, yung flat, static character, can usually be summarized by a single phrase or statement. That is, they have only few character traits and are generally merely types na of characters. Frequently, monodimensional characters are also static. That is, they do not develop or change during the play. Okay? Next is character and genre conventions. Sometimes the quality of characters can also depend on the subgenre to which a play belongs because genres traditionally follow certain conventions, even as far as dramatis personae, that is, the dramatic personnel, are concerned. According to Aristotle's guys, poetics in his works on poetics, characters in tragedies have to be of high social rank so that their downfall in the end can be more tragic. The higher they are, the lower they fall, di ba? The higher the building, for example, the higher the building you fall from, the bigger if the impact is when you fall off from that building. So parang ganon. So in Aristotle thought that um in tragedy the character, no, the main character should be in a high rank, social rank, so that when he or she fall, the more tragic it can be kasi malayo siya sa rank. Halimbawa from a conglomerate to kuan to servant. So parang ganun ba? From CEO to merely servant, parang gano'n. Okay? If we talk about no offense ha, no offense, but to just to kuan ba, just to classify. Okay, according to Aristotle, they are supposed to be neither too good, since tragedies deal with difficult conflicts and subject matters. Tragic heroes are usually complex. They are supposed to be neither too good nor too bad, but somewhere in the middle, which allows them to have some tragic flow. That is what we call hamartia. Okay, that um ultimately causes their downfall. So kung walay flow, there isn't something to fall from. Parang ganon. Since tragic heroes have almost average characteristics and inner conflicts, the audience can identify more easily with them, which is an important prerequisite for what Aristotle calls the catharsis, or literally, guys, a cleansing of one's feeling. That is the fact that one can suffer with the hero. You feel pity and fear at the same time. And through this strong emotional involvement, clarifies one's own state of mind and potentially become a better human being. Okay? So comedies, by contrast naman, deal with problems in a lighter manner and therefore do not necessarily require complex figures. Furthermore, types are more appropriate in comedies are their single qualities can be easily exaggerated and thus subverted into laughable behavior and actions. Next is contrast and correspondences. Characters in plays can often be classified by way of contrast or correspondences. Okay? By presenting corresponding characters in a contrastive manner, their individual characteristics are thrown into sharper relief, and certain qualities are highlighted with regard to the overall plot. Let's take, for example, um, the changeling, no? In Middleton's and Rowley's Changeling, for example, the characters in the main plot and the ones of the subplot are exposed to similar conflicts and problems and thus correspond with one another on certain levels, while their reactions are very different and thus show the contrast between corresponding figures. Beatrice, the protagonist of the main plot, and Isabella, Aliba's wives in the subplot, are both restricted by their social positions as wives and daughters. However, while Beatrice oversteps the boundaries by having her suitor Alonso killed in order to be able to marry Alcimero. Isabella fulfills her role as faithful wife and does not break the rules even when two suitors make advances to her. So if you wish, guys, to relate to what I'm talking about, you can actually read, get the summary of this. So there is contrast and correspondence in this particular play that I using as an example. Next is character constellations. Characters can also be classified according to their membership to certain groups of characters, no, both across the entire play as well as in the individual scenes. In other words, questions like who belongs to whom and which characters are friends or foes are also essential in drama analysis. If we want to if one considers the overall structure of the play and groups of characters therein, one deals with constellation of the dramatic personnel. Constellations, guys, can be based on sympathies and antipathies among characters on how they act and react to one another. Usually, one can make the distinction between heroes and their enemies or protagonists and antagonists, and one can find characters who collaborate and support one another while others fight or plot against each other. Obviously, character constellation is a dynamic concept since sympathies or antipathies can change and groups of people can also change. On stage, groups can be presented symbolically by certain distinctive stage props or costumes and also their gestures and relative spatial position to one another. Next is character configurations. In contrast to character constellation, the term configuration naman guys denotes the sequential presentation of different characters together on stage. Configurations thus change whenever characters exit or enter the stage. Conv- um, yeah, for example, again on in the first scene of Shakespeare's Richard III, for example, Richard appears on stage alone first, followed by the entrance of his brother Clarence and Brakenberry with a guard on men, after whose exit Richard is on his own again before Lord Hastings joins him. Before the first scene closes, Lord Hastings exits and Richard remains once again alone on stage. Configurations typically underlie the overall structure of scenes, but as example of Richard III shows, configurations can even change within scenes. So configurations are important to the extent that they show up groups and developments among groups of characters, which, yeah, in turn is essential for the development of the plot. Lastly is techniques for of characterizations. Okay, characters in drama are characterized using various techniques of characterization. Generally speaking, though, one can distinguish between characterizations made by the author in the play's secondary text, that is authorial, or by the characters in the play, that is figurial, and whether these characterizations are made directly or explicitly or indirectly or implicitly. No? Another distinction can be made between self-characterization and characterization through others. No? The way these different forms of characterizations can be accomplished in place can be schematized as follows. So you have explicit and implicit, authorial and figurial. So in explicit, descriptions of the characters in authors, commentary or stage directions, figurial characters descriptions and comments on other characters. So it isn't something stated talaga, but it's the characters, how the characters is described or how is the characters described by another character. Implicit when it is something not directly stated. No? Correspondence and contrast and directly characterizing names. Figural naman is their physical appearance. So they aren't really they are not directly described, no, but you can tell based on some indicators like the physical appearance, the gesture, costumes, behavior, the language, register, dialect, etc. So they aren't directly stated, but you can tell. There are indicators that could tell. That's figural implicit. Okay? So I have here an example, but it's for you to read na lang, alright? So, okay. From there, in the introductory scene of Jimny between Jimny and Cliff, no, um, the audience we may already have formed an impression of Jimmy being an honest, being an almost unbearable, angry young man because he insults his friend and tries to provoke his wife by making derogatory comments about her parents. So you have to read through for yourself na lang ha. The fact that he even starts shouting at Allison shows his ill temper, and he generally seems to be badly behaved. By contrast, Cliff tries to ignore Jimmy's attack as far as possible in order to avoid further conflicts, and he protects Allison. So, yeah, although it isn't directly stated there, it isn't explicit, but you can tell based on how Jimmy is talking to his cousin. Okay. So what has yeah, what does it do with the analysis? Analyzing a drama. Characters represent one of the most important analytical categories in drama since they carry the plot. Now, characters are the ones that keep are the ones that unfold the play. Without them, there it would be impossible for the play to be played. Right? In other words, there cannot be a play without characters. Characters' interactions trigger and move the play and move the plot. uh, and their various relationships to one another form the basis of conflicts or what conflicts there might be, and the dynamic process of the play. A lot of the terms used for techniques of characterization in a narrative are also much applicable in drama, but one needs to be aware of fundamental differences related to different medium. When we guys read a novel, for example, the narrator often describes the characters, right? Which we then have to imagine and bring to life in our mind's imagination or our mind's eye. While this exists in drama to some extent, to the extent that we often find stage directions or introductory comments in the secondary text, characters in actual performances are always already interpretations of stage directors and actors who bring characters to life for us or for the story. Our view of characters in staged plays is thus inevitably influenced by the way an actor looks, how he or she speaks, how he or she acts out his or her role, etc. Other influential factors can be costumes and makeup, the overall setting in which a character is presented. Okay. Next feature is types of utterance in drama. Dramatic language is modeled on real life conversations among people, and yet, when one watches a play, one also has to consider the differences between real talk and drama talk. Dramatic language is ultimately always constructed or made up. Okay, and it often serves several purposes. On the level of the story world of a play, language can, of course, assume all the pragmatic functions that can be found in real life conversations too. Example, to ensure mutual understanding and to convey information, to persuade or influence someone, to relate one's expression or signal emotions. However, dramatic language is often rhetorical and poetic. That is, it uses language in ways which differ from standard usage in order to draw attention to its artistic nature. Okay, when analyzing dramatic text, one ought to have a closer look at the various forms of utterance available for drama. So we must know the pragmatic functions and the rhetorical and poetic functions of the text. One should know that when we are dealing with drama, it certainly have this dramatic language no that of course uh, carry carry artistic nature. So one must have a good grasp to have a closer look at the various forms of utterance available for drama. Okay? In drama, okay, in contrast to narrative, characters typically talk to one another. So And the entire plot is carried by and conveyed through their verbal interactions. Language in drama can generally be presented either as monologue, dialogue, or soliloquy. Okay? So monologue means that only one character speaks, while dialogue always requires two or more participants. A special form of monologue where no other person is present on the stage beside the other is called soliloquy. Okay, soliloquies occur frequently in some plays like that of Richard III and in Shakespeare's Hamlet. No, it's um they make use of soliloquy. Okay, an example is this one. This is from Hamlet. Okay, all right. Next is asides. So another special form of speech in drama is the so-called aside or asides. They are spoken away from other characters, and a character either speaks aside to himself secretively to another characters or to the audience, and that is called ad spectatores. No, it is conspicuous that plays of Elizabethan age make significantly more use of asides in modern plays. For example, one of the reasons certainly has to do with the shape of the stage. The apron stage, which was surrounded by the audience in three sides, makes asides more effective since the actor speaks inevitably faces part of the audience, while our modern proscenium stage does not really lend itself to asides as the vicinity between actors and audience is missing. So what does it do with the analysis? Okay? Drama analysis. Dramatic language, guys, is multifaceted and fulfills a number of functions within a play. As a consequence, it can have various effect on the audience, right? Um okay. Next is turn allocation, sticomyth, esticomythia, repartee, and repartee. In comparison to monologues, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the word. In comparison to monologues and asides, dialogue is by far the most frequently used type of speech in drama. In analyzing dialogue, one can look into the turn taking and the allocation of turns to different speakers. Okay, how many lines is each character turn? Do some characters have longer turns than the other? And if so, why? One can also analyze how often a character gets the chance to speak through the entire play and whether he or she is interrupted by others or not. Another one is repartees. No. Esticomythia. Sticomythia. A special type of turn allocation occurs when speakers' alternating turns are of one line each other. Okay, this is called esticomythia and is often, albeit not exclusively, used in contexts where, say, characters compete or disagree with one another. Let's take, for example, this one. So it is quite evident no that the character King Richard and Elizabeth exchange utterances, one line utterance only. Okay, so this happens when characters seem to be competing or disagreeing with one another. One line each. Then, what's the one that we're missing? Repartee. So this repartee is a quick response given in order to top remarks of another speaker, or is it here? Hold on. I'm sorry. Another, or to use them to one's own advantage. The repartees, for example, is used no to make a remark of another speaker and or to use them to one's own advantage. Okay. So, the distribution and amount of turn speakers are allocated in plays is an important feature to investigate in drama. It is really important because you will look into the lines aside from knowing no or getting information on how much each character is um has exchanged lines with the others, but you may want to also look into the amount of turn takings, the allocations given to each speaker or each participant of the play. All right. Next is significance of wordplay in drama. The play with language, the play with language entertains spectators and at the same time attracts and sustains their attention. Consider the way the way Polonius introduced to the king and queen his explanation for Hamlet's madness. Okay, Madam, I swear I use no art at all, that he is mad. This is true, this is true, this pity. And pity, this is true, a foolish figure, but farewell it, for I will use no art. Mad, let us grant him then, and now remains that we find out the cause of this effect, or rather say the cause of this defect. For this effect, defective comes by cause, thus it remains and remains thus. By constantly juxtaposing and repeating words, Polonius attempts to display his cleverness because he believes to have found out the cause of Hamlet's madness, namely Hamlet's interest in Ophelia. Ophelia, who is Polonius' daughter. This play with sound patterns and words catches the audience attention because it derives from normal uses of deviates from normal uses of language. At the same time, it is entertaining, especially since the audience knows that Polonius' assumption is wrong and Ophelia is not the reason for Hamlet's madness. Thus, rather than appealing as clever, Polonius comes across as a fool who even uses a fool's language, although real fools were traditionally considered wise men who indirectly told the truth and held up mirror to society through their playful language. A special type of wordplay is the so-called pun. This is what I'm talking about earlier. No, this is a literary device in which you make you know a quick a witty way of playing with words. Now, where words are used which are the same, at least similar in sound and spelling, but different in meaning, like God knows who does not pay, and then the spelling is who does. But when you actually say it, God knows who, like who who does the DOES, not pay, but it can only be spelled with who does, like HUDAS. That's one ES. No, like that's pun. Okay. So another concept to be mentioned in the context of play with language is wit. No, the idea of wit, which combines humor and intellect, plays a significant role in play. Okay, or mostly in comedy of manners, of course. Types of stage. All right. So this is another feature, guys. The types of speech. Types of stage. I mean, drama, just like the other genres, has undergone significant changes in its historical development. This is partly attributable to the fact that stage types have also changed and have thus required different forms of acting. Let us take a look at the various stage forms throughout history. So these are the types of stages according to Feister in 1997. First one is Greek classicism. So that's the picture, guys. Can you imagine a stage looks that way? So plays in ancient Greece were staged in amphitheaters which were marked by a round stage around three quarters surrounded by the audience. Since amphitheaters were very large and could hold great masses of people up to Largely 25,000 actors could hardly be seen from far back, and for this reason, acting included speaking in a loud, declamatory voice, wearing masks and symbolical costumes, and acting were large gestures. Okay. Also, the chorus was viral part of ancient drama. It had the function of commenting on the play as well as giving warning and advice to characters. The stage scenery was neutral and was accompanied by real landscape surrounding the amphitheater. Plays were performed in broad daylight, which also made it possible to create an illusion of real life on stage, at least for night scenes. No, that was not intended anyway. Ancient Greek drama was originally performed on special occasions like religious ceremonies, and it thus had a more ritual, symbolic, and also didactic purpose. The next type of stage is Middle Age and Middle Ages. Medieval plays were primarily performed during religious festivities, like mystery plays, morality plays. They were staged on wagons, which stopped somewhere in the marketplace and were entirely surrounded by the audience. The close vicinity between actors and audience in this case has to account for a way of acting which combines serious renditions of the topic in question with stand-up comedy and funny or body scenes depending on the taste of the audience. Actors took into account the everyday experience of their viewers, and there was much more interaction between audience and the actors than nowadays. The lack of clear boundaries between stage and audience again impeded the creation of a realistic illusion, which was also not intended. No. Um okay. Next is Renaissance in Renaissance England. The Elizabethan stage was typically found in public theaters. Now that is plays were no longer performed outside. However, guys, no, the Elizabethan theater was still on open air theater as the lack of artificial lighting made daylight necessary for performances. An exception was the Blackfriars Theater, which was indoors and lit by candlelight. Theater groups were now professional and sponsored by wealthy aristocrats. Groups which were not under anybody's patronage were considered disreputable vagabonds. Now, the stage was surrounded by the audience on three sides, and there was still a close vicinity between audience and actors. The most common stage form in Renaissance England, guys, was the apron stage, okay, which was surrounded by the audience on three sides. This meant that actors could not possibly ignore their viewers, and that the theoretical devices such as asides and monologues ad spectatories were an integral part of the communication system. The stage set was reasonably barren, while costumes could be very elaborate. Since performances took place in broad daylight, the audience had to imagine scenes set at night, of course, for example, and respective information had to be conveyed rhetorically in character speech, that is word scenery, and was barely any scenery. Scenes could change very quickly with people entering and exiting. The two unities as well were thus frequently not strictly adhered to Elizabethan drama. Next, guys, is the Restoration period. So this is how the stage looks like. Theaters of the 17th and 18th centuries were considerably smaller than the Elizabethan theater. It could only hold around 500 people, I think. And performances took place in closed rooms with artificial lighting. In contrast to modern theaters where the audience sits in the dark, di ba previously sa Elizabethan it is plays conducted in the broad daylight. The audience in the Restoration period was seated in a fully illuminated room. One must bear in mind that people of the higher social class were also interested in presenting themselves in public and attending a play offered just such an opportunity, 'di ba? Those elite peoples would really go to um performance play, mga play, 'di ba? They would want to show off themselves and that they go to theoretical play. While the stage was closed in by a decorative frame and the distance between audience and actors were thus enlarged, there was still room for interaction by means of a minor stage jutting out into an auditorium. Furthermore, there was no curtain, so that changes of scene had to take place on the very stage in front of the audience. Restoration plays thus still did not aim at creating a sense of realism, but they presented an idealized, highly stylized image of scenery, characters, language, and subject matter. Next is modern types. The stage of the 19th and 20th centuries is called proscenium or proscenium stage or picture frame stage because it is shaped in such a way that the audience watches the play as it would regard a picture. The ramp, as you can see on the slide in the picture, the ramp clearly separates actors and audience, and the curtain underlines this division. Furthermore, while the stage is illuminated during the performance, the auditorium remains dark, which also turns the audience into anonymous mass. Since the audience is thus not disturbed from watching the play and can fully concentrate on the action on stage, it becomes easier to create an illusion of real life in place. Furthermore, the scenery is now often elaborate as a true to life play as possible, thanks to the new technologies in the 20th century and more detailed stage props. Next is, yeah, I think, yeah, that's the last type of stage, modern times. Okay. Next feature, guys, is dramatic subgenres. Ever since Aristotle's Poetics, one distinguishes at least between two subgenres of drama, comedy and tragedy. While comedy typically aims at entertaining the audience and making it laugh by reassuring them that no disaster will occur and that the outcome of possible conflicts will be positive for for the characters involved, tragedy tries to raise the audience concern to confront viewers with serious actions and conflicts, which, of course, typically end in a catastrophe, usually involving the death of the protagonist, diba, and possibly others. Both comedy and tragedy have, in the course of literary history, developed further subgenres, of which the following list provides. But these are only initial overview, guys. So let's start with the types of comedy. We have high comedy and low comedy. So sometimes scholars distinguish between high comedy, which appeals to the intellect, comedy of ideas, and has a serious purpose, for example, to criticize, while low comedy, where greater emphasis is placed on situation, comedy, slapstick, and farce. So it intends really to make people laugh. Okay. And there are further subgenres of comedy. You have romantic comedy. Okay, a pair of lovers and their struggle to come together is usually at the center of romantic comedy. Okay, so romantic comedies also involve some extraordinary circumstances like magic, dreams, the fairy world, etc. Next is satiric comedy, has a critical purpose, usually attacks philosophical notions or political practices and norms by ridiculing characters. So it is intended to be funny, but at the same time, it has its unique purpose to criticize. No, it has a critical purpose. No, usually to attack politicians. Okay. Next is comedy of manners. The comedy of manners is also satirical in its outlook. and it takes the artificial and sophisticated behavior of the higher social class under closer scrutiny. The plot usually revolves around love or some sort of amorous intrigue, and the language is marked by witty repartees and cynicism. Ancient representatives of this form of comedy are Terence and Plautus, and the form reached its peak with restoration comedies of William Wiltshire and William Congreve. Next one is farce. I think you're familiar with this one. Farce typically provokes viewers to hearty laughter. It presents highly exaggerated and caricatured types of characters and often has an unlikely plot. The farces employ sexual mix-ups, verbal humor, and physical comedy, and they form a central part of the also of the Italian commedia dell'arte. In English plays, farce usually appears as episodes in larger comical pieces. For example, Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. Then, um, next, tragedy. Okay, there are types of tragedy as well. You have cynical tragedy. So, you know what tragedy is, right? Okay. So for cynical tragedy, a precursor of tragic drama were the tragedies by the Roman poet Seneca. So this type of tragedy comes from the Roman poet Seneca. His tragedies were recited rather than staged, but they become a model for English playwrights entailing five-act structure, katong five-act structure by Aristotle, a complex plot, and an elevated style of dialogue. Then, revenge tragedy or tragedy of blood. This type of tragedy represented a popular genre in the Elizabethan age and made extensive use of certain elements of the Senecan tragedy such as murder, revenge, mutilations, and ghost. Okay. Next is domestic or bourgeois tragedy, in line with this changing social system where the middle class gained increasing importance and power. Tragedies from the 18th century onward shifted their focus on protagonists from the middle or lower classes and were written in prose. Okay, and we also have tragicomedy. The boundaries of genres are often blurred in drama, and occasionally they lead to the emergence of new subgenres, and that is tragicomedy or tragedy and comedy. Tragicomedies, as the name suggests, guys, intermingle conventions concerning plot, character, and subject matter derived from both tragedy and comedy. One example for this one is Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. Okay. Okay. So what do these categories have to do with, with the analysis of drama? So it is important to note, guys, that the these types of tragedy and comedy are reflections of the periods that they were popularized in. Okay, they and also the topics that are the themes that are explored and these types of tragedy are are much reflection of the time they were written or they were played. And knowing the types would also allow us would also help us analyze, the also analyze the kind of play that we are working on, because definitely we have to look into the style, we have to look into the type of tragedy or the type of or the genre that we are working on, so we may be able to get the idea of the piece. Okay. Now let's examine the general process of and analyzing a drama. Okay, so these are only general processes, guys, that we can look into when we analyze a drama. Okay, it isn't something that we do with the story, because in drama we look into the characters, mostly the characters and the plot. And that knowing also the elements of the drama, as we reviewed it earlier, and the features could allow us no process no the analysis that we will have to do with the drama, or the play. So the first one is, of course, we examine the title. Is it indicative of a conflict or a human condition? Is it symbolic or something else? Okay. Then, is it sarcastic, satiric, humorous, or serious? Is it descriptive? So we examine the title. Then we read the play. Now, not only once, but many times. Twice, thrice. Now, reading it first would not possibly be enough for us to get really particular that we are working on the character, the dialogues, the yeah, the characters, exchange of utterances. Are there any indications of the meaning? What is the topic, the setting, the voice? Now, is there a historical or cultural link? So on. Next is study the ending. Where has the play taken you? Okay, at the end of it, how does the play lead you to at the end of reading it or watching it? Fourth is examine the play by parts. So since most plays are divided or partitions according to acts or scenes, then there is really a need for us to examine each act or each scene. No, is there a purpose of breaking the acts or scenes at specific points, or why are they partitioned that way? Next is determine the tone. What is the author's attitude toward the subject of the play? You will get to know that based, of course, on the play that you will read. Okay, changes of utterances, etc. An analysis of a play, guys, is not a summary. An analysis requires an interpretation by the reader. An analysis may focus upon a single element or multiple elements of a play, the plot, character, dialogue, and other features, etc. An explication of our work may concentrate on a specific part of the play. An explication entails not only what the work means, but how it accomplishes the author's purpose. Okay, these are some of the questions, guys, that might help us discover a playwright's purpose and how he or she attempts to convey the meaning. So these are guide questions, no, that will help us while working on the analysis. We might want to consider these questions. We might want to, ask these questions in our head, so we may have something to that would guide us while writing our analysis. So first, we asked what is the theme, no, what happens, the plot, the story, who are the characters, what is the setting, what, are they any key statements, how does the language contribute to the meaning, does the play refer to other literary works, is there historical, ideological, cultural aspect, what qualities or emotions does the play evoke. So these are some of the questions, but certainly not the only questions that we ask. No, when we are analyzing a drama. But certainly, guys, those elements that we reviewed and the features that we discussed would help us, no, in the analysis of a play or drama. Okay, I guess that's all for our lesson this session. And I am really hoping that although this video is quite long, it's quite lengthy, but I hope that you are able to finish it entirely to the very end, and that you also made notes. you also have made notes of the important points that we discussed in this presentation. Okay, thank you very much and have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe and see you on our next synchronous session. Bye bye for now, everybody.